Start recording. All right, welcome everybody to class today. Of course, today is the 22nd of April and it's Flutter Part 8, and I'm going to talk a little bit about integration. Um, More specifically, integration testing. Then there's one other area I'd like to at least point out and talk about because I was intending to do more in depth on like integrating to backend database type of stuff, and I still can if people want me to take a look at that. Um, but since it's getting pretty tight in terms of what's left between now and the final, I also want to leave as much time as possible for people to work on their projects. Um, so without further ado, just a quick reminder of when your exam two. So hopefully people can either present their exam two on Friday the 24th. So as many people, I'd like as many people as possible to do it then. But if you can't do it then, I've also scheduled Friday, May 1st and Monday, May 4th for any last minute exam twos. So I'm trying to be pretty flexible here to give you time to work around what might work for you. Any questions on exam two? I think I covered it pretty carefully last time. I don't know if anybody has any other questions on that. Okay, not hearing anything there. What I'm going to kind of cheat this time and bring up this page and paste it in the text channel to talk about integration testing because I think it's a really good first overview. And if you haven't looked at it yet, then hopefully this will be useful to you. If you have looked at this in depth, then it may not be quite as useful, but we'll try at least meet the needs of some of you. So what I'm going to do here is in the um, class questions in the general chat channel here, I'm going to paste, let me think here, video links. Actually, it'd be make most sense under information. So under information, under the text channel, I'm pasting a link to the web page that I'm going to be talking about today. And this is the Introduction to Integration Testing web page, and I'm going to go ahead and bring that up here as well and just give you an overview of this. Um, so integration testing is, some of you may have taken, uh, um, well, you've done some integration testing if you've done data structures. And has anybody in here done Pete's testing class?
I took QA.
Okay, so one person's taking QA, and here I just want to put in a little plug for Pete's QA class next, I believe it is next fall. Anyway, um, it's a really good class to take, and I think it's an important class, especially to give you a wide variety of preparation for what you might go into. And if you've done data structures, you probably already did some integration testing as well. The whole idea of integration testing is to take your mobile application in this case, or take your program and run it through a series of tests. Now, why do we need to make these tests automated? The reason you need to make integration testing automated is because uh, you're going to have people working on your app making changes, but you don't want their changes to break the core functionality of what you already have. So there's some core set of features your app has that you want to work no matter what anybody else does or whatever other changes happen to your app. And it becomes very tedious to go through and manually have someone click all the buttons, run all the tests every single time your app changes. So integration testing is a way to write those tests ahead of time before you actually And in some cases, there are some people who advocate writing the tests as a part of the design and development before you actually implement the features. So the idea would be that you figure out what buttons are going to be pushed on your app and what those buttons should do, and then you can write the tests for those ahead of time. So here, in this link that I posted in the information page, it's under Doc's Cookbook Testing Integration and an Introduction to Integration Testing up on the Flutter document site. They talk about how to go through the process of creating these app tests. And it's actually really straightforward, and this isn't going to take me very long. So you will have time to, ask questions or try this out your own, or work on your take-home exam as well, or get help from me. But the main thing to do is you obviously have to have an app to test. And the key part of when you create this app to test is you need to make sure that all the widgets that you're going to be using provide a key along with those widgets so they can be accessed easily. So if we scroll down and look at this basic app, this is the counter app, which we had done a similar version of this, but I had modified it to go to different pages and things like that. If you come down to the text portion of this widget, you'll see they provided this key value here. And this key says key, and it's a key type, and it has the text counter. The same thing, they also had a floating action button here. And in the floating action button, they also added this key value to the floating action button itself. And this one's called increment. Now, the reason they add these keys is because what we're going to do is you have this app that you're going to test. We're going to automate finding those buttons and pressing those buttons. In order to find the buttons, you need a key to be able to look up either the text field that you're going to check the value of, or you need a key that you need to be able to look up the button that you're going to press. And so that's why you provide these key values. Now, you're going to have to provide a key value like this for every single interface in your app that you want to test. Now, obviously, if you're not going to test an interface and don't care about it, then you don't have to necessarily do that. But for each one that you want to be able to easily access with your testing app, your integration testing, you need to provide that key value. So once you have that key value, then you need to use the Flutter driver package. And the Flutter driver package is going to allow you to do this integration testing. So this automation of pushing buttons and checking values. So in your PubSpec YAML, you've got to go ahead and add the Flutter driver dependency, which is pretty straightforward. The next thing you need to do is create test files. So integration test suites don't run in the same process as the app that's being tested. Now, in data structures, you did unit testing. And there's also another type of testing you can do here, widget testing. But integration tests don't run in the same process as the app you're running. So you're going to have a couple files inside your project. And by convention, those files are going to live in this directory called test driver. So the first is going to be basically the instrumented version of this app. This instrumentation essentially is the code you're going to add that's going to let you run your app, push buttons, and then see how those buttons respond, and also to push buttons and then read text values or whatever. It's a way to get the data out of the app when it's being tested. So you're going to make this instrumented version, and the second is going to be your test suite. That's going to be the driver application, which is going to actually start up your app and verify that it's working as expected. the nice thing about it is it can also record how your app is performing, so how quickly it's operating, and um, in order to do this, you have to basically set up another file like apptest.dart. So you'll have the same name as here, like app.dart, but then you'll put an underscore test on the end of it. And then you'll have a directory structure that looks like this. You'll have your main Dart here, then you'll have your test driver folder, then you'll have your app.dart, that's the instrumented app, and then you'll have the app test.dart. Okay, to instrument the app itself, so that's going to be this instrumented app here, app.dart, you have to enable these driver extensions and then obviously run the app. So here's the code that they're showing you how it sets up. So what they do is they enable these driver extensions, and then this calls this function to enable it, and then you call the main function of your app. So basically, it's either going to be main or run app or whatever the main app is of your app that you want to test. Um, so that's setting up the instrumented app. And then finally, you write the actual tests. Now, these are very similar in many regards to unit tests if you've done those in data structures. But so in this test file, again, we're writing the tests that are inside this file here, apptest.dart. What you're going to do here is, again, you import the Flutter driver API and you import your test, in this case, you have to import the test.dart package as well. So these two things. Once you have those, then you can actually come down here and write the test. So what they do is they start by creating this group of tests inside here. And what we set up first is you set up a finder for each of the things that you either want to push or that you want to check the values of. So we have this counter text finder, which is going to look up the counter uh, text within your, so that's the text field. And the button finder is the increment button. So those were the two keys that we provided in our app previously. So once you have those two keys, then basically you're going to connect to the driver before running any tests. So this sets up the Flutter driver. And then, of course, you need a teardown function that's going to shut everything down after the tests are completed. And then you can have your tests. So the first test here is basically going to verify that the counter driver is going to start at 0. And so the very first test, when this test runs, it's going to basically uh, take the driver and say get text counter text finder. So remember, here's the counter text finder that we used here, the finder that found the text field. And this then is going to call that and get the text from it. And then we're going to expect that the value, once it arrives, is going to be 0. If it's not 0, then we'll see that this test fails. Then what we do next is we run a test which basically taps the button. So up here we had our finder, so our button finder to find by value key. And that button finder then tapped that button. Once it tapped that button, so it waits until the button's finished tapping. Then what it does is it goes and calls the exact get text, the text finder here, and verifies that it's 1. So I think this is a really good short synopsis of how to set up integration testing. And I think it's a pretty slick way of doing integration tests that isn't a lot of overhead and really lets you manually verify that something a latest change you made to your app doesn't break something. So then when you want to run everything, once you've set up this whole test suite, you run it and you can either, and for mobile apps, which is what we're doing, you're just going to do Flutter drive, and then you provide this dash dash target option, and then the app.dart file that's in your test driver folder. So this will build it, run it, and run all those suites. So that's an overview of integration testing. I think it's there's many different ways of doing this. There's other packages you can get, like you can do integration testing like this on Windows devices. There's Python libraries that will do this for other different types of applications. So there's lots of different ways you can actually do this. I think it's really cool that Flutter has this built directly into the core functionality of the whole Flutter ecosystem. Okay, so can everybody hear me okay? That's a quick overview of integration testing. Um, I hope it makes sense. Any questions or comments? Can
I had
you?
a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, so you so when you automatically create a Flutter app, there's a test folder, but
hmm
the test driver folder is different. So is the test folder for like unit testing?
That test folder is probably my guess is it's for either unit. I don't know for sure because I haven't used that myself yet. So my guess is it's for unit testing or widget tests. Um, and let's see here. We could go look at our programmatically. No, that's debugging. Oh, let's go back here for a second. Right over here, I saw it. Um, testing and debugging, testing. So this is a little bit different. So the unit test will test a single function, and a widget test will test a single widget. So my guess is, let's see. So they talk about unit tests, and let's go. So here they talk about integration testing, which is what we just talked about. Um, and under here we have unit testing. Let's see what folder they use. Sure enough, you're correct. This is for, is this a test folder you were talking about?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
yep, that's it. So this is for unit testing. And so remember, unit testing is for basically testing a single function or class, not testing your method as a whole. Um, and so unit testing is at a lower level, and it's going to be very similar to what we just went through for integration testing. The main thing here is you just like here's a class they're going to test, then you write a test for it that's going to expect what that other class should do. Then you combine them in a group. In fact, this looks identical to the integration testing we just talked about. So you set up this group of tests, and then you run the tests. And with VS Code, um, you just open the test.dart, debug, and start debugging. Or you can do this flutter run test counter test.dart. So in some ways, this is way simpler than the integration testing that we just talked about. This is testing at the class level or the function level as opposed to testing at the integration level. So that's pretty cool. So that's a good question, and I'm glad you brought it up because we hadn't talked about this unit testing at all, and I haven't run unit testing on Flutter myself. Has anybody done unit testing on Flutter? Anybody else? Anybody that's in software engineering done some unit testing with their Flutter apps? I highly encourage unit testing. In fact, when you guys took data structures, did you do unit testing? Or those of you that have done data structures?
Yeah, I remember doing unit testing and data structures.
Okay, that's one of you. Anybody else?
Yeah, we did it.
Okay.
I'm currently
Currently
all
doing
the
it.
time.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, good. All right, cool. So now you know, well, if you haven't done this already, then you know what you should have been doing, right? So one of the things, and I'm not sure if Pete talked about this in his software engineering class or not, but that's actually a really good way to design code is to write your tests first before you actually design your classes. But not all of us are patient to do that. It's a lot of work, but it really makes you think carefully about what it is you're building. So great question. Any other questions? So I would encourage you to run either unit testing or integration testing. Um, I'm not going to make it a part of the exam, as tempting as it is. But if you're bored and if you finished your exam 2 app already and you want to make unit testing for it, I would say go for it. I mean, integration testing or unit testing, I would definitely encourage you to go for it. Um, cool. Okay, so that said, I'm going to go ahead at this point and pause just to see if there's any general questions first, and then I'm going to basically hang out and give time for individual questions here. So I'm going to come back to my Discord app here, and I think I'm not sharing. Oh, there we go. I'm going to stop streaming, and I'm going to stop recording. So if I can find that.